What if everything you believed about love was merely a shadow of something deeper? What if the reason your relationships keep following the same painful patterns isn't because of bad luck, but because of unconscious forces you've never been taught to recognize? Carl Jung, one of history's most profound psychological minds, discovered that love isn't just an emotion, it's a gateway to our deepest selves. And within his work lie two extraordinary secrets that explain why some relationships flourish, while others repeatedly crash and burn. In the next few minutes, I'm going to reveal these two Jungian secrets that have the power to transform not just how you love others, but how you understand yourself. This isn't about superficial dating tips. This is about the archetypal foundations of human connection that Jung spent decades uncovering. If you've ever found yourself repeating the same relationship mistakes, if you've ever felt an inexplicable attraction to someone that defied logical explanation, if you've ever wondered why love that begins so perfectly can unravel so painfully, then you need to understand these two secrets Jung discovered. They explain everything. Before we continue, if you're new here, this channel explores the depths of Jungian psychology and how it transforms our understanding of love and relationships. Hit subscribe now and activate notifications, because what I'm about to share might be the missing piece you've been searching for. The first secret Jung uncovered about love is so counterintuitive that when I explain it, you might resist it initially, but by the end of this video, you'll see how it explains patterns you've experienced your entire life. Love, according to Jung, isn't primarily about finding someone who complements your conscious personality. It's about finding someone who embodies what he called your shadow and your anima, animus. But what exactly does this mean? To understand, we need to journey into what Jung called the collective unconscious, a psychological realm we all share, filled with universal patterns he called archetypes. These archetypes shape our attractions and repulsions in ways most people never recognize. But before I explain how these archetypes determine who you're drawn to and why, let me tell you something fascinating. Jung discovered that what we call falling in love is actually a psychological process he called projection, and it's both the most beautiful and dangerous aspect of human connection. What exactly is projection in the Jungian sense? Imagine carrying within you a collection of unconscious images, desires, and potentials that you don't recognize as part of yourself. These elements make up your shadow and your anima, animus, the masculine or feminine counterpart to your conscious identity. When you fall in love, what's really happening is that you're projecting these unconscious aspects onto another person. That overwhelming attraction, that sense that you found your other half. Jung would say you're really encountering disowned parts of yourself, embodied in another person. This is why love feels so magical and transformative. You're not just meeting someone new, you're meeting yourself, parts of yourself that have been dormant, repressed, or undeveloped. This person becomes a mirror, reflecting back aspects of your psyche you've never consciously embraced. But here's where the first secret becomes profound. The very qualities that attract you most powerfully to someone are often projections of your own unconscious potential. That magnetic pull isn't just chemistry, it's recognition. If you're finding this perspective on love eye-opening, you'll be even more stunned by what comes next. Stay with me, because understanding this projection mechanism is just the foundation for what Jung discovered about why relationships ultimately succeed or fail. Think about your past relationships for a moment. Have you noticed patterns in the qualities that strongly attract you? Perhaps you're consistently drawn to creative types, or analytical minds, or nurturing personalities. Jung would suggest you're drawn to these qualities because they represent undeveloped aspects of yourself. This explains why the initial phase of falling in love feels so euphoric and healing. In projecting your anima or animus onto another person, you temporarily experience wholeness, a reunion with split-off parts of yourself. This is what people mean when they say someone completes them. But there's a problem with this magical process of projection. It cannot be sustained indefinitely. And this brings us to the crucial turning point in relationships that Jung identified, the moment when projections begin to break down. When we first fall in love, we see the other person through the golden light of our projections. They seem perfect because we're not really seeing them clearly. We're seeing our own unconscious material overlaid upon them. But as intimacy deepens and familiarity grows, these projections naturally begin to withdraw. The withdrawal of projections is where many relationships enter crisis. Suddenly, the person who seemed like your perfect match begins to appear different. You start to see their flaws, limitations, and the ways they don't actually embody your idealized image. This isn't because they've changed. It's because your perception is clearing. The unconscious material you projected onto them is returning to you, leaving you to see the actual person before you, not the carrier of your anima or animus projections. Jung observed that this withdrawal phase is where many relationships collapse. The disappointment can be crushing. The very person who once seemed to hold the key to your happiness now seems ordinary, flawed, or even irritating. The magic dissipates, leaving many to conclude they've fallen out of love or chosen the wrong person. But Jung's first secret reveals something profound. This disillusionment isn't a sign of failure. It's an invitation to growth. The withdrawal of projections is actually a necessary psychological development that offers something far more valuable than the temporary euphoria of projection. When projections withdraw, you have two choices. You can abandon the relationship in search of a new projection carrier, repeating the cycle with someone else. Or you can embrace what Jung considered the true purpose of relationship. Conscious relationship, not just with another person, but with yourself. What I'm about to explain now is the turning point in understanding love from a Jungian perspective. If you've ever wondered why passion fades, or why disillusionment sets in, this next insight will completely transform how you approach relationships. Jung's radical insight was that the purpose of romantic love isn't sustained euphoria, it's psychological growth. When projections withdraw, you're faced with an opportunity to reclaim those projected parts of yourself while simultaneously developing the capacity to see and love another person for who they truly are, not for what they represent to your unconscious. This is what distinguishes immature love from mature love in the Jungian framework. Immature love depends on projection and feels magical, but is ultimately unstable. Mature love emerges after projections withdraw and involves the conscious integration of your own psyche alongside genuine connection with another real human being. But how exactly do you make this transition? This brings us to Jung's second secret about love, the one most people never discover because they're stuck in cycles of projection and disappointment. Jung's second secret is that successful long-term love requires what he called individuation, the process of becoming psychologically whole by integrating unconscious elements into consciousness. Individuation is not selfishness or isolation. On the contrary, Jung found that only individuated people, those who have done the work of integrating their shadow and anima, animus, are capable of loving another person authentically, without destructive projections and unconscious demands. The typical relationship cycle looks like this: projection, idealization, disillusionment, and separation. But Jung described a different possibility: projection, recognition of projection, withdrawal of projection, conscious integration, and finally, authentic connection. This second path is infinitely more rewarding, but also more challenging. It requires facing parts of yourself that you've denied or repressed. It means acknowledging that the qualities you most strongly love or hate in others are often reflections of your own unconscious. For men, this often involves integrating the anima, the feminine aspect of the male psyche, that carries qualities like emotional receptivity, intuition, and relatedness. For women, it involves integrating the animus, the masculine aspect, carrying qualities like logical analysis, assertiveness, and independence. What I'm going to share next is perhaps the most practical application of Jung's insights: how to actually recognize when you're projecting and what to do about it. This is where theory meets practice in ways that can immediately transform your relationships. Jung provided several indicators that you're in the grip of projection: excessive emotional reactions, positive or negative, to someone, a sense that someone is extraordinarily special or uniquely irritating, feeling that someone completes you, being unable to see flaws in someone you admire, being unable to see positive qualities in someone you dislike. The strength of these reactions is the key. The more powerfully you feel drawn to or repelled by someone, the more likely it is that you're encountering your own unconscious material in them. Jung's framework explains why opposites often attract. We're drawn to qualities that complement our conscious identity, qualities that represent our undeveloped potential. The quiet, analytical person falls for the expressive, spontaneous type. The responsible, practical person is drawn to the free-spirited dreamer. But if the relationship is to mature beyond initial attraction, both partners must develop the qualities they initially sought in the other. The analytical person must discover their own capacity for spontaneity. The practical person must nurture their own inner dreamer. Now let's explore how Jung's concept of the shadow operates specifically in romantic relationships. The shadow contains aspects of ourselves that we've repressed or denied, qualities we consider unacceptable or incompatible with our conscious identity. In relationships, shadow material creates some of the most intense attractions and repulsions. When you're powerfully drawn to qualities in another that you've repressed in yourself, that's shadow projection. When you're irrationally irritated by someone embodying qualities you deny in yourself, that's shadow projection too. Consider how often conflicts in relationships revolve around the same issues repeatedly. Jung would suggest these recurring patterns often indicate shadow material that hasn't been integrated. You're not really fighting about dishes in the sink or time management. You're encountering disowned parts of yourself. For example, if you pride yourself on being responsible and organized, you might find yourself continually attracted to free-spirited partners, then become increasingly frustrated by their irresponsibility. From a Jungian perspective, you're actually encountering your own repressed spontaneity and freedom, qualities you need to integrate rather than just criticize in others. Stay with me, because what comes next is crucial. How these shadow dynamics create the most painful patterns in relationships, and more importantly, how to break these cycles using Jung's approach to psychological integration. The most damaging relationship patterns often stem from unrecognized shadow projection. When you project shadow material onto a partner, you essentially task them with carrying aspects of yourself that you've rejected. This creates an impossible burden that leads to resentment on both sides. Jung observed that what we resist in ourselves, we persist in attracting in others. If you continually find yourself in relationships with partners who embody a quality you consciously reject, like emotional neediness, controlling behavior, or unreliability, this pattern suggests you need to acknowledge and integrate that quality within yourself. This doesn't mean you should become needier, more controlling, or less reliable. It means recognizing how these tendencies exist within you, even if in subtle forms. When you stop projecting them onto others and take responsibility for them in yourself, you break the unconscious compulsion to attract partners who embody them. Jung would argue that the qualities we most vehemently reject in others often represent our own inferior function, the least developed aspect of our psychological makeup. For thinking types, this might be emotional sensitivity. For feeling types, it might be logical analysis. For intuitive types, it might be practical groundedness. Recognizing your own inferior function and consciously developing it is one of the most powerful ways to transform your relationship patterns. This is the heart of individuation, the process of becoming psychologically whole. Jung identified several archetypes that powerfully influence romantic attraction. Understanding these archetypal patterns can help you recognize when you're in their grip and make more conscious choices about love. The most significant archetypes in romantic relationships are the mother-father archetype, influencing attraction to nurturing or authoritative qualities; the divine child archetype, drawing us to innocence, playfulness, and potential; the hero/heroine archetype, attracting us to strength, courage, and the capacity to overcome obstacles; the wise man/woman archetype, creating attraction to wisdom, insight, and guidance; the trickster archetype, drawing us to spontaneity, humor, and rule-breaking. Jung was fascinated by alchemy, not for its literal attempts to transmute metals, but for its rich symbolic description of psychological transformation. He saw in alchemical texts profound metaphors for the integration process that occurs in mature relationships. The alchemical concept of the sacred marriage, or conjunctio, provided Jung with a powerful image for what happens when two individuating people form a relationship. Rather than merging into undifferentiated oneness or remaining completely separate, they create something Jung called the transcendent function, a third psychological entity that emerges from their union. This alchemical marriage differs fundamentally from romantic fusion. It doesn't erase individual identity, but creates something new that encompasses and transcends both partners while preserving their uniqueness. Jung described 4 stages in this alchemical process: nigredo, blackening; the initial confrontation with shadow material in the relationship, albedo, whitening; the purification that comes through withdrawing projections, citrinitas, yellowing; the dawning of new consciousness and insight, rubedo, reddening; the full integration of conscious and unconscious elements. These stages aren't experienced just once, but cyclically throughout a deepening relationship. Each cycle brings more unconscious material into consciousness and creates greater psychological wholeness in both partners. The alchemical marriage requires that both partners commit to their own individuation, their own integration of shadow and anima, animus. When only one partner is engaged in this process, the relationship typically becomes unbalanced and unstable. Jung observed that many relationships break down during the nigredo phase when shadow material emerges. The initial romantic projection gives way to disillusionment and conflict. Without understanding the psychological purpose of this difficult stage, many couples separate rather than work through the transformation it offers. Those who persist through nigredo discover that conflict, when approached consciously, can be tremendously generative. The very qualities that create friction can become sources of growth when recognized as carriers of unconscious material needing integration. This alchemical perspective reveals why relationships that survive major crises often emerge stronger. The crisis forces unconscious material into awareness, where it can be integrated rather than projected. Both partners develop greater psychological wholeness and capacity for authentic connection. How do you apply these Jungian insights to transform your actual relationships? Here are specific practices drawn from Jung's approach. Track your projections. Notice when you have outsized emotional reactions, positive or negative, to others. These reactions often indicate projection. Ask yourself, what quality in this person am I strongly responding to, and how might it relate to disowned aspects of myself? Examine relationship patterns. List the qualities that have attracted you to partners and the qualities that have ultimately frustrated you. Look for recurring themes. These patterns reveal your dominant projections and the aspects of yourself seeking integration. Dialogue with the unconscious. Jung developed active imagination techniques to communicate with unconscious aspects of the psyche. When struggling with a relationship issue, try writing a dialogue between your conscious self and the problematic quality. For example, if you're frustrated by a partner's neediness, write a dialogue with the needy aspect of yourself. Pay attention to dreams. Jung considered dreams the primary way the unconscious communicates. Dreams featuring romantic partners often reveal projections and unconscious material affecting the relationship. Keep a dream journal and look for patterns related to your relationship concerns. Distinguish feeling from projection. Learn to differentiate between authentic feelings arising from actual interactions and projected feelings based on unconscious material. Projection typically involves magnification. The emotional response exceeds what the situation objectively warrants. Reclaim projections. When you recognize you're projecting a quality onto a partner, consciously work to develop that quality in yourself. If you're drawn to a partner's creativity, nurture your own creative expression. If you're frustrated by a partner's logical approach, develop your own analytical capacity. Respect the shadow. Rather than trying to eliminate shadow qualities, acknowledge them consciously. Shadow integration doesn't mean acting out negative impulses, but recognizing them as parts of your complete psyche. This recognition alone often reduces their disruptive power.